Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Sophia Iqbal. I am the head of program for the World Water Week team. Thank you all for joining us today for our next installment of our convener training for 2023. Behind behaviors for improvement of outcomes. We are here today with Katie Hefner from RARE. Yep, thanks, Katie. And she will be going through some tips and tools for really applying behavior-centered design for your sessions, both online and on site. So now I will go ahead and pass it over to Katie. Actually, before I do that, sorry, just one thing. So we will be taking questions at the end of the presentation today. We'll have time for Q&A. So feel free to add your questions to our chat. Otherwise, we will allow everyone to unmute themselves at the end of this presentation so you can ask your questions live as well. All right, now on to Katie.
Great. Thank you, Sophia. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. I'm excited to be here. I do want to preface with my slides were not working, and so you'll be hearing a lot of clicks from me, which is not ideal, but I don't have control of the slides today, but not a problem. So I'm Katie Hefner. I'm coming to you from RARE Center for Behavior and the Environment, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the role of behavioral science, what is behavior-centered design, and then how you can think about it in your session design, as well as generally in improving water outcomes and different resources and places you can go for more information. The next slide. Every conservation challenge has at least one thing in common. It doesn't matter whether you're working on plastics, whether you're working on fertilizers, whether you're working on wildlife trafficking. Every conservation challenge has one thing in common, which is click, and that is behavior. So it doesn't matter whether you're trying to work on all of these challenges, whether you're working with a consumer, a government official, a fisher, a farmer, a corporate leader. Everyone in some way is working to change behavior, because at their core, environmental challenges are behavioral challenges. And so to solve them and address them and to reach the outcomes that we want to achieve, we need to come up with behavioral solutions. So the question remains, how do we do that? How do we effectively motivate behavior change? And so that's what we'll talk a little bit about today and what we work at RARE Center for Behavior and the Environment. So before we get into that, I want to do a little, nope, that was right. I want to get into a little challenge. So I'm going to ask everyone a question, and you can use the chat feature to respond. And my question to you is that you're about to buy a new phone charger, and it's $21.99. When you learn the exact same charger is available down the street for $12.99. It's about a 10 minutes walk away. Would you walk to the other store to get the cheaper phone charger? So just put yes or no, or any of your considerations in the chat. Great. So we have some comments coming in. Let's go to the next one as people are responding. And you will probably figure out what I'm doing here, but we're going to go with it and be honest. So you're about to buy a MacBook for $1,329 when you learn the exact same MacBook is available for $1,320 at another store, 10 minutes walk away. Would you walk to the other store to get the MacBook? So now use the chat again if you would walk to the other store for the next MacBook. All right, so I think everyone can see we had quite a few yeses at the beginning, quite a few no's, quite a few in the middle who had some if-then statements. But if you go to the next slide, the reality is the question that I asked you was exactly the same. It was, would you walk 10 minutes to save $9? And the question that I framed to you is, would you walk 10 minutes to save $9? It's a different question, right? There's different elements, different considerations. And that's the truth when we think about human decision-making. So next slide. When we think about human decision-making, we have a spectrum of the ways that we make decisions. In the tens of thousands of decisions that we make every day, on the one hand, we have this very rational side, where we weigh the costs and the benefits. We make an intentional choice based on all of the information we have available, and we maximize for something that we are maximizing for, whether that be time or money or something else. On the other side of the spectrum, we have this very reactive, quick, automatic, emotional. We have this kind of instinctive, might not even think about it way of decision making. And over the course of our day, we make decisions on one side, on the other, and somewhere in the middle. There are all sorts of ways that we make decisions, and we consider our options when taking on some behavior. Next slide. The challenge, though, is that when we think about the most common tactics for behavior change when we're applying them to our environmental solutions, is historically, they've really played towards the one rational side of the spectrum. We've thought about material incentives. We pay them, we give them $9, we charge them $9, and them $9. We give them a reusable bag or a reusable straw. For rules and regulations, we tell them there's a rule, you can't do this or you must do that. Or we give them information, we tell them how big the plastic island is out in the ocean or how much climate is changing. And with that data alone, we think that they will make their, they will choose the option that is most environmentally friendly. Next slide. Now, the challenge with that is those levers can be effective, but they're often, they can be effective, but they're necessary, but they often don't always work on their own. Financial incentives can backfire. They can crowd out other motivators. They can drain financial resources if you're giving away money or things constantly. And they can also be starting to be seen as the cost of doing business. Rules, you need to enforce the rules. That can be challenging on where you are. Rules are also not necessarily always aligned. If they're not aligned with a social norm or what people are commonly used to, it can be very hard to keep them enforced. And finally, we know that information alone does not motivate action. We all know that we should be exercising 30 minutes multiple times a week. We all know we should be eating a certain number of fruits and vegetables. We all know we should be doing certain things. That doesn't always mean that we do. And so information alone is not is necessary sometimes, but not sufficient to drive action. So next slide. When we think about these things, we want to think about the full spectrum, and what we promote at our Center for Behavior and the Environment is this other side of the spectrum as well. We think those first levers can be necessary and important, and we promote the adoption of those. And we promote the less historically or less traditionally used levers, such as emotional appeals, which is the concept that emotions can drive us to act, social influences, that people can take their lead from others, and that we care what other people in our peer group, whether that's our friends, our religious leaders, our family, our community, we care what other people think of us, and we take our lead from them. And also the context in which we make decisions matters a lot. The timing, the place, that's what we call choice architecture, which is like the structure of your decision-making environment. So I'm going to dive in quickly into these three levers before then talking about how you can also apply some of these less traditionally used levers to your presentations. Next slide. First one that I'm going to go through is emotional appeal. So that's using emotional messaging instead of ones that appeal to the more rational perspective. So, you're right. So I'm going to use this example with chocolate cake. We are, I will preface this with it can be some triggering for some depending on where you are in your health journeys. But one example that displays this emotional messaging really strongly is around chocolate cake. And what these researchers did is they split the groups, 3 people into 3 groups. In the first treatment group, they walked in and people walked into a room and there was a cake in the middle of the table and they said, imagine how bad you will feel if you ate the cake. You've been working really hard on your own health journey, and this cake would really derail you. You might feel shame, you might feel guilt. You just might feel bad about the fact that you ate some of this cake when you've been working really hard to avoid this kind of thing. And they walked out of the room. In the middle group, they said, there's cake here. Imagine how proud of yourself you would be if you avoided this cake. Think about where you are in your health journey. Think about how you will have had this willpower, the strength. Think about all these positive things and left the room. And then the third group, they did nothing and they left as well. And so then they went back and looked at how many people ate cake. And next slide. So we had these groups then there were 3 different treatment groups. You can see them here. I'll give people a moment to guess which group was most effective. You don't have to put it in the chat, but just give it yourself a second to think. And I will tell you now that the click is the group that was most successful is the pride group. So that was the group that got the positive messaging. And what was even interesting after that fact was then the groups between which was second most effective. And if you click again, you'll see that the least effective was shame, and the second most effective was the control group, the group that said nothing at all. And so that can be a really powerful message when we're thinking about emotions and the use of emotions in environmental messaging. And that's also why RARE very often uses powerful and positive emotions when motivating people towards environmental actions. And you might be sitting there and thinking like, well, Katie, this is cake. I'm working on things that are way more important than cake. And while I would argue that cake is a very important thing, if you click, they did some research that actually translates this over to, so next slide, this translates it over to the environmental decision-making space where the influence of pride and guilt can be a really strong motivator, particularly pride over guilt in getting people to take some sort of pro-environmental behavioral action. So one thing that I will also promote is that our Center for Behavior and the Environment released a paper on the role of emotion in driving environmental action, and the particularly which types of emotions can be most effective in motivating action. And so things like fear can be powerful and important when you need to do a quick action, where things more like hope and pride can be a more sustained. And so we have a paper that digs into the actual individual emotions and where they can be. But just something to be thinking about, not only in your own programs, the power of emotion, but also in your sessions, which I'll highlight in a little bit. So next slide. The next one I'm going to highlight is this concept of social influences, which I mentioned is how the behavior, beliefs, and expectations of others will influence what we're working on. So next slide. I want to start with an example, and this is from Stanford University out of the United States. And this was an example out of a cafe. And the researchers were looking at plant-friendly or plant-rich diets. How do we get people to eat a little less meat and a little more vegetables in their meals? And so what they did is in the cafeteria at lunchtime, they put people into a line and they gave them coupons. And the coupons were able to then figure out what they ordered at the end of their meal. And in the first group, they said that they gave this message: 30% of Americans make an effort to limit their meat consumption. And in the second group, you can click, they gave this other message, which is over the last 5 years, 30% of Americans have started to make an effort to limit their meat consumption. Now it's a little nuanced change, but you can see the difference, and what it's the difference between what we call a static norm and a dynamic norm. A static norm is something that has stayed the same, or there's a statement, and a dynamic norm is that the norm is shifting. There's a transition happening, and you can be part of that new group. Anyway, they then measured what happened and who ordered and limited their own meat consumption as a result of getting those different messages. If you click, you'll see the graph there. And what was interesting is, once again, the dynamic norm, outperformed the static norm, the messaging of have started to, and then the static norm actually performed worse than the control once again, but they're close enough that they might be able to fit within the ranges there. So this is a really powerful thing to be thinking about, the concept of static and dynamic norms, particularly when a majority group is doing the thing that you don't want them to do, but there is a growing population of people who are starting to take on a new behavior, which is the one you would like. Think about like whether it's buying electric vehicles or putting solar panels on their homes, or starting to use reusable bags or reusable straws, or all of those things. If it is actually true, which I would very much promote, and we have reason to believe that you can't just lie with dynamic norms. But if it is really actually true, that messaging can help you encourage people to move in the right direction, rather than saying 80% of people aren't doing this. Why would you? Because you're actually telling them that the norm is not to do something. So that is a really powerful thing to do, is to help people move towards the next to the next stage of what you want. So next slide. Yep, that was right. The other thing that we often highlight is that the biggest predictor, this was research on climate change in the United States, on people taking action on climate change, and the biggest predictor of whether people would do things, like the biggest climate mitigating behaviors, whether that was solar panels, electric vehicles, plant-rich diets, different things. It was not what you would think. It was not whether people were their political orientation, which is very much tied to climate change in the United States. It was not whether people believed in climate change. It's not what they believed should be done. It was what other people were doing and what they thought other people were doing. And so this is really important because when you start thinking about motivating action, what we found is it's not necessarily communicating to people that climate change is real. It's not communicating to people what should be done to address climate change. It's actually communicating to people what other people are doing. And so this social influence can be incredibly powerful in getting people to take action. And so when we think about this from a water perspective and also from our sessions, we'll get into that in a second, how you can use this as a tool for driving action coming out of your sessions and towards the things that you're hoping people will accomplish based on the messaging that you give them. So the next slide is choice architecture, which is obviously the structure and timing and the context in which we convey information and make decisions. So the first example we will go to from there. Oh, I wanted to highlight this for a second because this is very common in the environmental sector, and this is also very common in people's sessions, which is you give them 50 ways to make your life greener, give them so many options of things that they should do and ways that they could incorporate the more environmental actions into their lives. The challenge, though, is it creates almost decision paralysis. People aren't quite sure if they aren't able to really filter through the information themselves. They might just kind of say this is great and take maybe some of the lesser or easier things, which might not actually be that impactful at all. Or they might just say, I don't have time or space or capacity to process this and put it aside. And so rather than giving these big lists, we really need to narrow down the field. And so I'm going to give you another example. It comes from another food space. I'm intentionally doing some that are not water related, but I'll get to where you can find water examples later as well. So this comes from a grocery store where they were putting out jam for tasting. So this is like a preserve, depending on where you are, this is like a fruit preserve that you can spread on crackers or bread or in sandwiches. And so they put out 6 different flavors of jam or jellies. And 40% of people stopped for a taste. When they stopped for a taste, they would get a little coupon again, and the coupons they could take and they would check out. And they found that 40% of people stopped for a taste, 30% of those went on to purchase the jam. Then they looked, and the next slide or click, and they put out 24 different types of jam. Now, I'm not even sure where you get 24 different flavors of jam, but they did. They found them, they put them out, and 60% of people stopped for a taste, which is great, right? So in your theories, you're thinking 60% of people stopped for a taste. More people stopped than stopped with the 6. But then when you go back and look and click again, only 3% purchased. Now that's the challenge because our desired behavior is actually purchasing. And so this can be incredibly powerful because what we have here is that even though we had more people stop for a taste, less people took the desired behavior. And so there's lots of different insights that you can take out of this. One of the ones that I frequently try to highlight is that awareness and intention is not always the same as behavior. And so just because in our environmental messaging, we've often been tying our outcomes towards awareness outcomes, towards intention outcomes. And one of the things that we really push at the center is thinking about what is actually the desired behavior. What does that awareness and intention lead towards, which is action? And how do you measure action? And how do you think about really getting towards the actions you want to achieve, not just the intermediary steps and stopping there. So that's one from choice architecture that I think is incredibly powerful. The next slide. Now, I told you not to use lists, and I'm giving you a little of a list now, but I'll tell you how to filter through yourself. We have, you can click on it. We have at behavior.vera.org. We have a platform that goes through and talks to and helps you learn all of the different types of strategies that you can use within the less traditional levers that I just walked through, the emotional appeals, the choice architecture, the social influences, as well as the more traditional levers, which we also think can be very powerful, as well as the combination of levers together. So we have these levers and different ways that you can use them, different strategies and case studies and all that at behavior.vera.org for you to be able to then go through and learn more about how they can be applicable to the work that you're trying to accomplish. Next slide. But I mentioned to you, and you heard earlier about this concept of behavior-centered design, and the challenge is I have this giant list of strategies. How do I know which one to do? Should I just throw an emotional appeal at any challenge I'm trying to reach? Should I throw an emotional appeal at my audience when I'm standing in front of them during my session? And the answer is no. You actually want to be very strategic and intentional about what you choose to do and when, and that really depends on your outcomes. So I'm going to walk you through what behavior-centered design is and the steps, and then we'll get into sessions a little bit. So behavior-centered design is basically the marrying of the behavioral science that I talked about earlier and the insights and principles with design, human-centered design thinking. You hear a lot about this with user UX, with online things. You hear a lot about it with different just consumer experiences and product design. And so this is behavior-centered design is a marrying of the two. And so this helps us identify what steps and which levers we should be using and how and where and why in our programs. So the first step is this concept. I'll go to the next slide because these are 8 steps that I'm going to walk you through just very quickly so you understand the point here. And if you see the little hand signs that go like this, the point here is that this is non-linear and that you might need to stop and reevaluate things along the way. And that might mean going back and forth or revisiting steps as you go. So next slide. So the steps, the first step, if you click, is frame. And that is really defining what do you want your audience to do? What do you want your audience to do as a result of your environmental program? What do you want your audience to do as a result of your session? And really going through and understanding in this step, this is where you can do some systems mapping. You can identify the problem. You can identify who are the core actors. And by the end of this step, you want to identify who are the core actors and what specifically do you want them to do in a behavior. And it needs to be specific enough so you're not just saying, I want to reduce plastic pollution, but you want them to recycle, or you want them to bring a reusable bag. Having a little bit of granularity and very specific so that people understand what you're actually asking them to do and helping define that for people. So thinking a little bit about what you want your audience to do, even as a result of your session, is very powerful. So the next step is this empathize step. And this is what is their experience. And this is where it can be in a few brief one-on-one conversations. It can be in a full RCT, randomized control trial, all different types of ways to collect data to understand your audience. And it's really about what is their experience. It's not what your experience is and what you care about. It's not what you think that they care about or what you think it is, but it's really understanding what they say is their experience. And that can be very, very, very powerful in helping consider and drive what kind of content you produce, as well as what messaging and program you design and what levers you use. So then the next step is to map. And that's where we take the insights that we identify during the empathize step, and then we put in the behavioral insights and the principles so that we can understand what is really coming out for us. For example, we might hear in an environmental campaign that people find religion to be a very powerful experience. And so then we might select to partner with a religious leader or religious organization to motivate action, but really understanding what insights can you draw from their experience, who they are influenced by, what they're influenced by, what they are thinking about, what is their experience like, and how you can then design for that, which comes in that next stage, which is the ideate stage. And that's where you come up with all sorts of different ideas and strategies and ways that you can leverage what you learned during the previous stages to then apply them to the work that you're doing. Now, what I want to emphasize here is that it's very, very, very common. And even though this seems very obvious, we see it time and again where people in the frame step, once they identify what is the problem and and who do I want to do what? So they say, like, I want people to start using reusable bags. Immediately then, it's very common to say, here's the problem. Okay, let's ideate solutions. And this slows you down just a little bit to think through what are the evidence-based strategies and why do I want them? Not just this seems to be the best idea because I'm most excited about it and this is what we had in mind. But it really helps us go through and do a strategic evaluation of what would be most effective. So the next steps along are prototypes. Yep, that's right. So you want to select which evidence-based strategies. You take your list of ideate solutions, you choose one, you make a little prototype. And this is for you to do a small scale test to see if it's effective. That might be with a smaller group, that might be with a portion of your solution, but what will this look like in real life? And you'll put it out there. And when you actually test it, you get some results, you see what people think. If they like it, what they don't, you might need to reevaluate, come back to your prototype. Hopefully it's successful. It might not be fully successful. It might not be at all, but you kind of put together even content and start putting little pieces together and see if this would be effective. And then finally, the last stages, if you click, are how do we take this to scale? How do we build this out further? How do we create a full-scale model? And then how do we know that we were effective? How do we know that it's working? How can we continue to refine it and build along the way? And so that's what we promote as behavior-centered design throughout. So next slide. You might be asking, and I've mentioned this a little bit throughout, how does this apply to hosting some of our events? What does this mean? And how do these levers and design processes impact what I'm doing, what I'm thinking about now putting my sessions together? So next slide. The first one I'm actually going to start with is choice architecture, because I think this is a really powerful tool. And this is, again, the structure and timing of our decision-making environment. There's this great book by Chip and Dan Heath called The Power of Moments that talks through how you can create pivotal moments for people and what are what's the special sauce that makes moments special and powerful. And there's a structure that we often think about, or I think about when I'm creating events, which is this thing called a peak end rule, which is when you look back at an experience that you had, your experience is not, your overall score of the experience is not an average of your overall, of your like minute by minute experience. So it's not the sum and the average of how you experience that entire time, minute by minute. You remember that event by those peaks, the pits, and kind of the transitions and the end. And so there's these ways that you remember it. And so when you're putting together these sessions and you're thinking about design, a lot of times is thinking through, okay, what is going to be a peak moment? What is going to draw people in? What are they really going to remember? And I'm going to attract their attention, and that's going to be a peak moment in their time with me. And then how do we end? How is that end powerful in their memory? They're going to be going to a lot of sessions. We all are. We are going to have hopefully a lot of fun along the way and a lot of information, and a lot of inspiration. How does this stand out? What is the peak? Hopefully not many pits. And then how do we end to make this an interesting session that will help people remember it and then take action along the way? So that's one way to think about choice architecture, is this peak end rule in your session design. So the next one is this emotional appeal. And this is, again, this is what emotions we can use to draw out. So you might be saying, okay, well, how do I create the peaks? Because I just told you about peaks a few minutes ago. Positive emotions create these peaks. Joy, pride, inspiration, humor. How can we think about creating those emotions within our sessions to then create a peak moment? Can you make people smile, crack a laugh? Or maybe you tell them an inspirational story that moves them in some way. How can you make them feel good about themselves and the work that they're doing? All of these positive emotions can create the peak moment that you're hoping to accomplish in your overall session design. The next one that I would say is strategic surprise. You can make things memorable by throwing in little surprises here and there. You might have seen it earlier in my session where we revealed some data around surprising people on, maybe you weren't surprised at all, but on which treatment group was most successful, or when we did the test on whether you would walk 10 minutes to save $9. All of those little moments of surprise, even though they are small, they can help make things memorable and they can help things stick in people's brains. And the last one under emotional appeals that I'll keep for you is keeping their interest. So that's eye contact, slide design, pace, tone, all of the things that will keep them in the positive emotion space and keep their interest, because there are going to be long days, mini sessions, lots of things competing for attention. And so the ways that you can keep their interest throughout the session, keep the positive emotions going, will be really impactful in how you can keep people towards the outcomes that you hope that they will accomplish. And so then the last one, and the last piece that I'll kind of talk a little bit, is social influences. How can you create a social convening here? I mean, people will be getting to know each other. Many people already do know each other. Many people work together. There is a network that exists within the World Water Week community. But how do you allow for more moments of connection? How do you bring people together? How is your session make people feel connected to the work that you're doing? And then click also to the next bullet is to the cause. So how do you create this joint mission that people are working together, that they are a community of practice, that there are certain things that are expected of people when they are working together? What does good look like, and how can they jointly accomplish that together? So how can you create the social fabric of this community that will get them to drive towards action? And the last piece that I promised, because I know we are running a little bit tight to be able to give people time for questions and to go through things, is if you want specifically on this idea of a joint mission, and specifically also on this joint mission for behavior change in the water space, we have a platform, Behavioral Insights and Water Pollution, which will actually give you examples of all of the levers and how they relate to water pollution and water management, different science and research, but also case studies and examples out in the field. If you want to be pulling some of this stuff into your sessions, or different examples, or even just are interested and want to learn more about how you can apply it to your own work, I highly recommend this website. We've been working on it and put it together about a year ago. So there's that. And then the final thing that I'll end at, because I know I'm a little bit early, but I want to give time for questions, is we do have, I mentioned the platform, behavior.rare.org. It's a space for anybody and everybody. It's all free. All of our resources are up. All you have to do is go on the platform. You can have access to toolkits and case studies and science. We have trainings available, all sorts of different things that can help you apply the levers more effectively and identify which levers can be most effective in the work that you do. With that, I will take a pause and a breath and open it up to any questions people might have.
Hi, everyone. So you should be able to unmute yourselves now, but I recommend just raising your hand, and then Katie can call on you. Or if you're feeling shy, you can ask questions in the chat as well.
Or I just did such a good job, nobody has any questions.
Definitely a possibility. Definitely a possibility. All right. Well, do we have a hand?
We have
we have some questions. Would you mind showing the 8 points again? So let me just go ahead and share my screen again. And then
the behavior-centered design, the 8 steps.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, just 1 second. Can you see my screen? Okay, the 8 points. These 8 points, is that what we're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
No?
Yeah. Yeah,
These.
those were 6.
Oh, 6 points. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's the 8 of behavior-centered design, I think.
Oh, so these. Sorry,
Yeah.
these.
Great.
Yep. And then, so that was from Ken. And then we have from Christine, excellent presentation. Will it be shared somewhere? Yes. So this will be available on our Convenor Success Program, and we'll be able to put the link to our Convenor Success Program in the chat. And then it should be available tomorrow, by tomorrow morning, for those of you, who didn't catch the whole thing or want to refer back to it. Is there a hand up? Is that Ken?
Yeah, it's Ken.
Yeah, sorry, I just if you could show a set, I was writing down your points because I thought that slide was very insightful.
This one.
Yeah, but I just wanted
Okay.
to see it all again because you moved on a little bit fast for me at the end.
Sorry.
So is it working? What needs to change? Was the bit I missed? But as I'm on it, when we have a session, which is how long is it? 40 minutes or something, I can't remember.
It depends on the type of session you have.
Yeah. So I suppose my immediate thought, I mean, these are all great points, and it reminds me of stuff I've sort of read casually in the past, and of course forgotten. But it's bringing these ideas into a session in a way which is going to resonate, which then goes back to your emotional appeal moments, your peak, the things that people will remember, without crowding the whole thing out, because I suppose there's a risk of trying you can almost overdo it. So where is that balance in your experience? Is there a sort of an appropriate balance of how much you address these 8 points in a session, which of course is going to be limited in time, regardless of regardless of the topic?
Yeah, and what I meant to communicate with these steps is that these don't have to be explicitly in your session. It's how you about when you're putting the session and the content together. So you don't actually have to have all these steps. In fact, you probably wouldn't even be able to do the prototype and launch and test everything in this step. But in your session, it wouldn't be necessarily to highlight these 8 steps. So every session is actually going to have the content that they want to convey based on the topic and whatever you are interested in promoting. I would say this is how you think about when you're processing your session, you're putting together your slides, thinking about, okay, what do I want my audience to do? How does that come through in the content? What is the audience going to be experiencing? What is our audience going to be feeling when they walk into the room or sign online for my session? Maybe they might be at the end of a long day. They might be at the very beginning of their day. So just understanding what your audience's experience will be. And then how can I use that experience? Okay, so if it's the end of the day, maybe I need to re-emphasize my points at the end. If it's the beginning of the day, maybe I need to do something to help get them moving, wake them up. Is it after lunch? That's the same kind of thing. But thinking about, okay, what are the insights from where my audience is when they come into the room? And then how can I use those and use my session to still reach what I want my audience to do? So I don't actually think that you need to highlight these steps at all in your presentations or in your content, as much as when you're starting to do the final steps, just thinking a little bit about where people will be and what kind of mindsets they'll be in.
Yeah, okay.
And it looks like we have another question. Hopefully I haven't missed one from Aura. It was a very insightful presentation. Thank you very much. Do you have any special recommendations to promote our sessions by taking into account this behavior concept?
I mean, I'm putting together some sessions myself, and that is a good question, and I don't have a perfect answer. Honestly, offhand, I think it would be, I would have to go through the steps honestly myself and thinking about like, where do I want my people to come? Why do I want them to come? How can I reach them? What would draw them in? All of those questions. What is the unique thing that you are offering from your session that will be helpful for them? What is the value from your session? So I would say just thinking about what they would gain from being in your session and how you can convey that to them in a way that would get them there. I don't know if that means, yeah, I wish I had a direct answer, but I would say going through these steps, just even getting people in the room is going to be tough. There's going to be a lot of stuff going on and a lot of information, and so how you can be effective in getting people interested.
Thanks, Katie. All right, yeah. So it looks like we have answered all the questions, but Miriam has a question or has raised her hand.
Hi, and thanks for a really great presentation, Katie and Sophia. I'm really keen to know whether you or anyone in the audience has attended a session or an event in the past that was really great from a behavioural perspective and hit a number of the strategies outlined in the presentation, and also like what you remember from that event that was so great, like what was the resounding memory or takeaway you had from that session?
Yeah. So one that it was a whole day conference that we put together. It was called the Beehive, and we'll have another one next year, actually in 2024. It's the Behavior and Environment Hive, and we've done a few of them. But one of the things that we think about when we put together, it's a conference, but when we put together the conference is we actually have, I take a lot of inspiration from when I put it together from media and the different types of media that is out there, because I find that they are the real experts in how humans consume information and how they convey and get people's attention. And so we did a session at National Geographic full day conference where we had a comedian from Saturday Night Live who was the host, because we brought in humor and he was able to bring in the thread throughout. We had behavioral scientists who were sharing insights and concepts, but did it in a game show format where they had to buzz in and tell things. These are much probably more structurally different than you will have time to do for your sessions. But the pieces that we thought about too is no presentation was really more than 10 minutes. We mixed it up between telling case studies and science and data, and we put in polls where we could, ways for the audience to meaningfully interact. We added interest in different videos that kind of broke things up. And so as you think about your session, think about the fact that most people kind of only pay attention for a few minutes at a time. And so then how do you pull them in? Another important thing to be thinking about is if your session is online, it's also going to be important to keep the interest and attention, because for in-person sessions, when people need to step away or do something, it is very hard to be the person to stand up in the middle of a room while a session is going and walk out from the middle of your seat. There's a little bit of social influence there. When you have somebody on the computer, they can click off. They might not even come back. They can be doing other things. And so just thinking about the state in the empathize stage about like, what is their experience? That can also help you keep action. Yeah.
Thanks, that's great.
Do we have any other questions? I don't see anything in the chat at the moment. Anyone else want to raise their hand? Okay, then with that, oh, hi, Ken.
Sorry, because everybody's very shy. I want to make sure you earn your keep. Someone said, well, what were the moments you remembered from sessions? And I've probably been to enough sessions to last me several lifetimes. many of which I have found to be very disappointing, I have to say. And so I'll give you the one positive and the one negative. I'll start with the negative. The one negative personally is when you have the expert panel sitting on a bunch of armchairs pontificating to themselves as if the audience was behind a glass screen with very little engagement. I've even had sessions at major events where I've seen the moderator almost frightened of eye contact with the audience, with his head, in this case was him, with his head firmly focused on the pontificating experts. And I personally find that one of the biggest turnoffs one can imagine. The opposite of that, different context, was I saw a talk once, again, another major water event, where the essence of the talk was really, you can communicate 3 points in a talk. And if you, with the evidence-based, if you go more than 3, the attention of the audience drops off significantly. That was a talk which I completely remember in terms of its impact, and actually thinking about, well, okay, you know, the messages should be short and they should be sharp. And I think that's also what you're saying. But that was based on my earlier observation of, you know, if you try to crowd too much in there, you're going to lose the audience. And that was what, I mean, these are personal reflections only, so other people may have different views, but I thought I'd share those two simply because we have a few minutes.
Yeah, no, those are great examples. They're also examples of peak and pit moments that clearly have stood out in your brain. They're examples of why you mentioned the three very easy and memorable things that you can help people. And it also is very clear in terms of what they wanted you to do. And so that's kind of taking a lot of this into practice and thinking through, you know, I'm sure the panel went through all of the things that they wanted to convey or think about. And so they thought this was very important information, but really reframing your session for what the audience will be experiencing when within your session will be valuable. Thank you for sharing that.
All right. Anyone else want to share some examples or ask another question? All right. No raised hands. Any questions in the chat? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Katie, for your time today. I know it's a bit of an early morning for you. And I really appreciate your time. And to everyone who's joined us today, thank you also. We look forward to the next convener training, which will be July 17th. So stay tuned for that calendar invitation. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.